Don't talk. That's what the Korean mafia boss whispered to the black woman standing over him with a gun. Don't talk. Don't scream. Don't tell anyone what you've seen. But she wasn't there to talk. She had a job. A simple job. Kill the mafia boss, get paid, disappear. She'd done it 17 times before. This was supposed to be number 18. But what Adana didn't know when she walked into that Seoul medical room was that the man bleeding beneath her, Min Jae Park, had been hunting her sister's killers across 3 continents. That his obsession with justice had made him the most dangerous mafia boss in Seoul. That the same people he was trying to destroy had hired her to stop him. One bullet would end it all. One squeeze of the trigger and she'd collect her payment, vanish into the night, and never think about Korea again. But when she looked into his eyes, bleeding, vulnerable, waiting for death, something stopped her. Something she hadn't felt in 10 years. Something that felt dangerously close to recognition. And in that single moment of hesitation, in that impossible choice to lower her weapon instead of firing it, Adana ignited the most dangerous forbidden love story Seoul had ever seen. This is the story of a black woman assassin sent to kill a Korean mafia boss. This is the story of how saving your enemy becomes the most radical act of all. This is the story of Adana and Jin Ho. And it started with 2 words: don't talk. 10 years ago in Lagos, Nigeria, there lived a girl named Amara. She was 16 years old, beautiful, brilliant, and filled with the kind of hope that only exists before the world teaches you to be afraid. She had dreams of becoming a doctor. She studied late into the night by candlelight when the electricity went out. She tutored younger children in the neighborhood for free, because she believed education could change everything. She lived with her younger sister, a girl of 7 whose birth name was Adana, though that name would soon be buried so deep that even its owner would forget it existed. Lagos is a city of brutal contradictions. Gleaming skyscrapers rise next to tin-roofed shacks. Luxury cars navigate roads where children sell water bottles in traffic. Billion-dollar oil deals happen in boardrooms while families a mile away choose between food and medicine. It's a city where beauty and violence coexist so naturally that you stop seeing the contradiction. You just accept it as the way things are. When you grow up in Lagos, you learn certain truths early. You learn that the police don't protect you. They protect whoever pays them the most. You learn that the government doesn't serve you. It serves itself. You learn that organized crime isn't something separate from society. It is society. It controls the ports, the banks, the politicians, the churches. Controls everything. And you learn that if you want to survive, you need to become invisible. You need to move through the world without drawing attention. Without making enemies. Without possessing anything that someone more powerful might want to take. Amara didn't understand that lesson yet. She was too young. Too optimistic. Too convinced that goodness would be rewarded. That hard work would be recognized. That doing everything right would keep her safe. She was wrong. Their father had died 3 years before the night everything changed. Heart attack, the doctors said. Though Adana would learn much later that it wasn't his heart that killed him. It was the debt. It was the pressure. It was the impossible choice between paying back money he'd borrowed from Lagos cartel to keep his family alive, or watching his children starve. He'd chosen a third option. A bottle of pills. A quiet death in a room where his daughters wouldn't find him until morning. Their mother never recovered from that loss. She threw herself into work, cleaning office buildings at night, selling food from a cart during the day, doing laundry for wealthy families in the in-between hours. She was never home. She was always exhausted. She loved her daughters with a fierce, desperate intensity. But love doesn't pay rent. Love doesn't keep creditors away. Love doesn't stop the men from coming to collect on debts that transfer from father to children like genetic disease. The night they came for Amara started like any other night. Their mother was at work. Adana was at the kitchen table doing homework, pencil gripped tight, concentrating on mathematics problems she didn't fully understand. Amara was behind her, braiding her hair with practiced fingers, humming a song their father used to sing, talking about her plans for the future. "I'm going to get a scholarship," Amara said softly, her fingers weaving Adana's hair into intricate patterns. "I've been studying so hard. My teacher thinks I have a real chance. And if I get the scholarship, I can go to university. I can become a doctor. And then I can take care of you and Mama. We won't have to worry anymore." Adana remembers nodding. remembers believing her, remembers thinking that if anyone could do it, it would be Amara. Amara who was brilliant, Amara who was kind, Amara who believed the world rewarded merit. The knock on the door came at exactly 9:47 p.m. Adana remembers the time because she'd been watching the clock, counting down the minutes until their mother would come home. The knock was polite, almost gentle, not the aggressive pounding of police raids or angry neighbors. Just a calm, civilized knock that suggested reasonable people on the other side. Amara opened the door. There were 3 men. All of them wore expensive suits. The kind of suits that cost more than Adana's family made in a year. All of them smiled. All of them spoke with the practiced courtesy of professionals who understood that violence could be delivered with politeness. "Good evening," the first man said in Yoruba, then switched to English when he saw Amara's confusion. "We're here about your father's debt. May we come in?" Amara should have closed the door. Should have run. Should have screamed for help. But she was 16 and scared and trying to be adult, trying to handle things the way she thought adults handled things. So she let them in. They sat at the kitchen table. One of them pulled out papers, documents with her father's signature, with numbers that made no sense, with legal language that Adana was too young to understand but that Amara read with growing horror. "Your father borrowed $20,000 3 years ago," the man explained, his voice calm, almost sympathetic. "He made payments for 6 months. Then he stopped. Then he died. The debt, according to the contract he signed, transfers to his oldest surviving relative. That's you, Amara." Amara's voice shook when she spoke. "I'm 16. I can't possibly repay that. Give me time. Let me finish school. Let me work. I'll pay you back. I swear I will." The man smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was almost sad, almost sympathetic, which somehow made it worse. "We've heard that before," he said. "Words are easy. Intentions are cheap. We need collateral. We need assurance." "I don't have anything," Amara whispered. "You have yourself." Those words hung in the air like poison. Adana didn't understand them at the time. She was 7 years old. She didn't understand what they meant when they talked about working off the debt, or opportunities in other countries, or arrangements that benefit everyone. She only understood that Amara started crying, that the men stood up, that they weren't asking anymore, they were taking. What happened next exists in Adana's memory as fragmented images. Screaming. Amara's hands reaching for her as the men pulled her toward the door. Adana launching herself at one of the men, tiny fists pounding uselessly against his legs. A hand cold professional, pushing her away. The door closing. The lock clicking. Silence. And Amara's last words shouted through the closed door. "Don't talk, Adana. Don't tell anyone. They'll come back for you if you do. Don't talk. Don't talk." Adana sat on the floor for hours. Not moving. Not crying. Not processing what had just happened. When her mother came home at 2 a.m. and found her there, when her mother asked what happened, "Where is Amara? Why are you sitting like that?" Adana didn't speak. She didn't speak for 6 months. Not because she couldn't, but because Amara had told her not to talk. Because some part of her 7-year-old brain believed that if she obeyed perfectly, if she did exactly what Amara said, maybe Amara would come back. Maybe silence would be rewarded. Maybe being good would bring her sister home. It didn't. Amara was never found. Her body was never recovered. There were whispers in the neighborhood, stories about girls being taken, about trafficking networks, about ships leaving Lagos port with cargo that wasn't listed on manifests. But whispers weren't evidence. Whispers didn't bring anyone home. Their mother went to the police. The police took a report. Nothing happened. Their mother went to local officials. The officials expressed sympathy. Nothing happened. Their mother went to churches, to community leaders, to anyone who might help. Everyone expressed sympathy. Nothing happened. Because in Lagos, when the cartel takes someone, they're gone. And the system that's supposed to protect you is the same system that profits from the taking. Adana's mother died 2 years later. The official cause of death was listed as pneumonia, but Adana knew the truth. Grief had killed her. The inability to save her daughter had killed her. The debt that had taken Amara now took their mother too. Just in a different way. At 9 years old, Adana was alone. No father. No mother. No sister. No family. Just a girl in a city that devoured the weak and forgot the forgotten. She should have died. Should have become another statistic. Another orphan swallowed by poverty and violence and indifference. But something in her refused to disappear. Something in her transformed the grief into something harder. Something colder. Something that understood that the world was not a place where goodness mattered. It was a place where power mattered. Where invisibility meant survival. Where becoming nothing meant staying alive. She stopped going to school. She stopped living in her family's house. It was repossessed anyway. Sold to cover debts that kept multiplying even after everyone was dead. She moved into the streets. Learned which areas were safe and which weren't. Learned which adults could be trusted and which would exploit her. Learned how to steal food without getting caught. Learned how to become invisible. By age 13, she'd been noticed by the same organization that had taken her sister. One of their recruiters saw potential in her. Saw a girl who'd survived things that killed most people. Saw intelligence, resourcefulness, ruthlessness that came from having nothing left to lose. They offered her a choice. Work for us or die alone. She took the job. Not because she forgave them. Not because she forgot Amara. But because she understood something about power that most people don't learn until it's too late. You can't destroy a system from the outside. You have to learn it from the inside. You have to become part of it. You have to make yourself indispensable. And then, when you're strong enough, when you're skilled enough, when you're powerful enough that they can't touch you, then you burn it all down. She changed her name to Omega. The last letter of the Greek alphabet. The end. It symbolized that she was finished being Adana, the girl who'd lost everything. Omega was nobody. Omega had no past. Omega couldn't be hurt because Omega didn't exist. For the next 14 years she became exactly what they needed. She learned languages: Yoruba, English, French, Korean, Russian. She learned combat tactics, surveillance techniques, infiltration strategies. She learned how to read people, how to manipulate situations, how to kill efficiently and disappear before anyone realized what had happened. She worked for them, but she also worked for herself. Every skill she learned, every connection she made, every job she completed, it was all preparation. All fuel for the fire that had been burning since she was 7 years old. She moved beyond Lagos by the time she turned 20. Her reputation had grown. She was the person criminal organizations called when they needed someone to disappear, and they didn't want questions asked. She was expensive. She was effective. She was invisible. 17 targets over 10 years. Russians in Moscow. Americans in New York. Koreans in Seoul. Politicians. Rival gang members. Whistleblowers. Anyone who became a problem for whoever was paying. She told herself she didn't think about Amara anymore. That she'd moved past it. That the grief was buried so deep it couldn't touch her. But the truth was different. Every target she eliminated was a small payment toward a debt she intended to collect. Every job was practice for the day when she'd finally be ready to destroy the people who'd taken her sister. She just needed to be strong enough, skilled enough, connected enough, powerful enough that when she finally made her move, nothing and no one could stop her. She didn't know that day was coming sooner than she expected. She didn't know that a job she thought would be routine, just another target, just another payment, would change everything. She didn't know that walking into a medical room in Seoul to kill a Korean mafia boss would force her to choose between revenge and something she'd forgotten existed. She didn't know that the man she was sent to kill had been hunting her sister's killers for the past 6 months. All she knew was that when the encrypted message came through, Seoul Park Minjae, 48 hours standard protocol, she felt something in her chest that she'd been ignoring for years. A whisper. A warning. A feeling that this job was different. She ignored it. She'd ignored that feeling 17 times before. This was just number 18. Except it wasn't. Before we continue, if you're already hooked by Adana's story, if you understand what it means to carry grief like a weapon, if you've ever lost someone and felt the same powerlessness she felt, hit that subscribe button now. Because this story gets so much darker before it gets better. The moment when she finally meets Jin Ho, the Korean mafia boss hunting her sister's killers. Everything you think you know about this story is about to change. And you won't want to miss what happens when the person you came to kill becomes the person who understands your pain better than anyone else in the world. The briefing came on a Tuesday morning while Omega sat in the departures lounge of Dubai International Airport, drinking black coffee that tasted like nothing, staring at flight information displays showing destinations she would never visit as herself. She'd been in Dubai for 4 days, waiting for payment to clear from her previous job. A Russian oligarch's business rival who'd been making threats about going public with information about money laundering operations. The job had gone smoothly. It always went smoothly. She was good at what she did. Too good. The payment had arrived that morning. $200,000 transferred through cryptocurrency channels that couldn't be traced back to anyone. Standard rate. Standard procedure. Another number in an account she accessed through servers that didn't officially exist. She was considering Bali for her next destination. Somewhere warm, somewhere she could disappear for a few weeks, somewhere with good internet so she could monitor her encrypted channels for the next job. She'd bought a ticket. She'd checked her bag. She was 20 minutes from boarding when her phone vibrated with the encrypted message. Just coordinates in 4 simple words. Seoul. Park Min-jae. 48 hours. No additional information. No context. No client name. Just the assignment. That was unusual. Most of her jobs came with detailed briefings, background on the target, reason for elimination, specific requirements about how it needed to look. Accident. Suicide. Send a message. But this one was bare minimum. Just a name and a deadline. She ran Min-jae Park through her databases. What she found made her pause. Park Min-jae wasn't just another mafia boss. He was something more complex. More dangerous. He'd taken over Seoul's Korean-American operations 5 years ago, after his predecessor had been killed in a territorial dispute. Since then, he transformed organized crime in Seoul from street-level thuggery into something that looked almost legitimate. He controlled shipping ports in Busan. He had operations throughout North America, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. His network reached into government offices, financial institutions, police departments, intelligence agencies. He was protected by everyone who mattered because everyone who mattered was profiting from his operations. He should have been impossible to reach. Untouchable. Surrounded by layers of security and protection that made assassination nearly impossible. But Omega didn't deal in impossibilities. She dealt in vulnerabilities. In patterns. In the small moments of exposure that every person has, no matter how powerful. And within 6 hours of receiving the assignment, she found Min-jae's vulnerability. 2 weeks earlier, he'd been shot during a meeting with a rival organization. Nothing life-threatening, just a shoulder wound. But serious enough that he'd been moved to a private medical facility for recovery. The facility was housed inside an underground casino in Seoul, accessible only through restricted entrances, protected by significant security. But security had patterns, and patterns could be exploited. Omega discovered that Min-jae's organization was planning a major operation, a coordinated raid on rival territory across Seoul, scheduled for exactly 47 hours from now. During that operation, most of Min-jae's protection detail would be pulled to support the raid. The medical facility would have minimal security for a 12-hour window. Perfect timing. Perfect opportunity. The more she researched, the more something felt wrong. She couldn't identify what. Just a feeling. An instinct she'd learned to trust over years of staying alive in a profession where one mistake meant death. The job felt too easy. The timing too convenient. The lack of detailed briefing too suspicious. But the payment was already being arranged. She'd received confirmation of $300,000, 50% more than her standard rate. Someone wanted Min-jae Park dead very badly, and they were willing to pay premium rates to make it happen. She should have walked away. Should have trusted her instincts. Should have recognized that when something feels wrong, it usually is. But $300,000 was $300,000. And she'd learned long ago that hesitation got you killed in this profession. You took the job, you completed it, you moved on. Feelings were distractions. Instincts were just fear wearing a different mask. She canceled her Bali flight. Booked a ticket to Seoul under the name Marie Dubois. French national, fashion consultant. In town for meetings with luxury brands. The passport was flawless. The cover story was airtight. She'd used this identity 4 times before in different countries. It had never failed her. The flight from Dubai to Seoul was 14 hours. She spent most of it sleeping, The practiced sleep of someone who'd learned to shut down their mind on command, to rest whenever possible because you never knew when you'd get the next opportunity. But somewhere over the Indian Ocean, suspended between one life and another, she had a dream. She rarely dreamed anymore. Had trained herself out of it. Had learned to maintain such rigid control over her conscious mind that her subconscious had stopped trying to communicate with her. But this dream broke through all her defenses. She was 7 years old again, sitting at the kitchen table in Lagos. Amara was braiding her hair, singing softly, talking about scholarships and medical school and futures that would never happen. The knock came at the door. Gentle, polite, civilized. The men entered. They smiled. They sat at the table. They explained the debt. They explained what would happen next. But in the dream, one of the men had a face she recognized. Korean. Sharp features. Handsome in a dangerous way. Eyes that held something she couldn't name. Pain that mirrored her own. Min-jae Park. She woke up gasping, heart pounding against her ribs, hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The businessman sitting next to her glanced over with concern. "You okay?" he asked in English. She didn't respond. Omega didn't make conversation with strangers. Omega didn't show weakness. Omega was a professional. But for just a moment, suspended 35,000 feet above the ocean, caught between sleep and waking between Omega and Adana, she felt something crack in the armor she'd spent 14 years building. She forced it down. Buried it. By the time the plane touched down at Incheon International Airport, she was Omega again. Cold. Controlled. Ready. Seoul greeted her with humidity and neon and the organized chaos of a city that never truly sleeps. She moved through customs with practiced ease. Answered questions in perfect French accented English, smiled politely, presented documents that couldn't be challenged because they were genuine fakes created by professionals who understood how to make ghosts look real. She checked into the Park Hyatt Seoul. Luxury accommodations. The kind of place where wealthy international business travelers stayed and staff didn't ask questions as long as credit cards cleared and guests didn't cause problems. She spent the first night studying surveillance footage she'd purchased from contacts who specialized in security breaches. She watched the casino's patterns, memorized guard rotations, identified blind spots in camera coverage, mapped escape routes through architectural blueprints she'd obtained through black market channels. Everything was falling into place exactly as it should. This was just another job. Just another target. Number 18 in a long line of people who'd made the mistake of becoming someone's problem. But that dream kept whispering in the back of her mind. Min-jae's face in her kitchen in Lagos. The feeling that something about this assignment was different. The instinct screaming at her to walk away. She ignored it. Feelings were distractions. Instincts were weaknesses. The only thing that mattered was execution. On the second night, she prepared her equipment. A tailored black dress that looked expensive but concealed tactical elements. Weapons that could pass through standard security screening. Communication equipment. Lock-breaking tools. Everything she'd need to infiltrate, execute, escape. She studied herself in the hotel mirror. Beautiful. Professional. Unremarkable. Just another wealthy woman in a city full of wealthy women. Nobody who would be remembered. Nobody who would stand out. Perfect. The casino's security shift change was scheduled for 11 p.m. That was her window. 12 minutes when the old team was handing off to the new team. And nobody was paying quite enough attention to what was happening in restricted areas. She arrived at the casino at 10:30 p.m. Moved through the gaming floor with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. She played a few hands of blackjack, losing deliberately. Ordered an expensive whiskey she didn't drink. Made polite conversation with a Korean businessman who tried to flirt with her in broken English. All of it was theater. All of it was cover for what came next. At 10:58 p.m. she excused herself. Moved toward the bathrooms. Took a turn down an unmarked corridor. Used a cloned security card obtained through channels she couldn't trace. The door opened. She slipped through into the restricted areas. The corridors behind the casino were different, sterile, minimalist, functional rather than beautiful. She moved through them with practiced ease, avoiding cameras she'd already identified, timing her movements to gaps in guard patrols she'd memorized. The private medical facility was on the 4th floor. VIP level. She reached the elevator, used her cloned card again. It worked. The doors opened. She stepped inside. As the elevator ascended, floor numbers lighting up in sequence, she felt it again. That warning. That whisper telling her to stop, to turn around, to walk away from whatever waited behind the door to room 407. She ignored it. The doors opened. She stepped into a pristine corridor lit by recessed lighting that made everything look slightly unreal. She walked toward room 407 with purpose, with confidence, with the certainty of someone who'd done this 17 times before. She reached the door, put her hand on the handle, took one breath to steady herself. This was the point of no return. Once she entered that room, she was committed. No backup plan. No safety net. Just execution and escape. She pushed the door open. And everything she thought she knew about this job, about herself, about what she was willing to do, all of it shattered in an instant. Min-jae Park was awake. That wasn't supposed to happen. According to Omega's intelligence, gathered from hospital records she'd hacked, from guard schedules she'd obtained, from every piece of information she'd been able to collect, he should have been sleeping, sedated by pain medication, vulnerable, unprepared. Instead, he was watching her enter with the calm awareness of someone who'd been expecting her, waiting for her, almost welcoming her. He looked different from his photographs. The images she'd studied showed a man in expensive suits, cold eyes, the kind of dangerous beauty that came from power and controlled violence. But lying in that medical bed, pale from blood loss, white bandage wrapped around his shoulder, for line in his arm, he looked human. Young. Maybe 35. Maybe younger. Tired in a way that went deeper than physical injury. He smiled when he saw her. Actually smiled. Not the smile of someone afraid. Not the smile of someone begging for mercy. The smile of someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment and was relieved it had finally arrived. Omega, he said in English, his accent slight but present. He spoke her operational name like he'd known it forever. Like her arrival in this room was the conclusion of a story that had been unfolding long before she'd received her assignment. She raised her weapon. Professional distance maintained. No hesitation. This was the moment. Pull the trigger, complete the job, walk away with $300,000 and never think about Seoul again. But he spoke again before she could fire. You don't know why you're really here, do you? His voice was quiet, controlled. Not the voice of someone trying to negotiate for his life. The voice of someone stating a fact. She didn't respond. Omega didn't engage in conversation with targets. But something in his tone made her pause. You don't know who hired you, he continued. Or why they want me dead. You don't know what I've been doing for the past 6 months. You don't know that the people who sent you here are the same people I've been hunting across 3 continents. Her weapon didn't waver, but something in her chest tightened. Your handler, Min-jae said, watching her face for recognition. The one without a face. The one who gives you coordinates through encrypted channels and pays you through cryptocurrency accounts. The one who's used you for how many jobs now? 17? 18 including this one. She didn't confirm. Didn't deny. But her silence was answer enough. He works for Lagos Cartel, Min-jae said. The same organization that's been operating trafficking networks through West African ports for the past 20 years. The same organization that moves 300 children a year through Lagos, through Busan, through Seoul, through Los Angeles. The same organization that took your sister. The words hit her like a physical blow. Your sister. He knew. He knew about Amara. He knew about the thing she'd buried so deep she'd convinced herself it didn't hurt anymore. He knew about the one truth she'd spent 14 years running from. I know her name, Min-jae said softly, and there was genuine pain in his voice. Amara. 16 years old when they took her. Taken from Lagos 10 years ago as payment for your father's debt. Sold into a trafficking network that I. He paused. Swallowed. Continued. That I helped operate. Those words should have made her pull the trigger. Should have made her empty the entire clip into him without hesitation. He just confessed to being part of the system that destroyed her sister. He just admitted complicity in the worst thing that had ever happened to her. But he wasn't finished. I was 25 years old, he said, when your sister was processed through our Seoul operations. I was new to leadership. Ambitious. Stupid. I convinced myself that the trafficking was just business, that it was necessary to maintain our operational reach, that the children being moved through our networks were just numbers on spreadsheets. He met her eyes fully now. No evasion. No excuses. I didn't know their names. I made sure I didn't know their names, because if they were just numbers I could sleep at night. I could tell myself I was building an empire. I could pretend I wasn't complicit in destroying hundreds of lives. Adana's weapon lowered. Just an inch. Just enough to show that something in his words was getting through her professional armor. But 6 months ago, Min-jae continued, I saw a photograph. A girl. 16 years old. Japanese. Beautiful smile. The kind of face that stays with you even when you try to forget it. Her name was Yuki. She'd been taken from Tokyo, moved through our Busan operations, sold to a Los Angeles trafficking ring. He shifted slightly in the bed, wincing from the shoulder wound. She escaped. She survived. She testified. And in her testimony she named names. Operations. People. Including me. Min-jae's voice dropped even quieter. I could have had her killed. I had the resources. The connections. One phone call and she would have disappeared like all the others. But I didn't make that call. Instead, I looked at her photograph, at her testimony about what had been done to her, and I thought, what if someone had looked at Amara's file 10 years ago and had the same thought? What if someone had chosen differently? The room fell into heavy silence. Just the beeping of medical equipment. The hum of air conditioning. Her own heartbeat too loud in her ears. I got out 6 months ago, Min-jae said. Walked away from the organization. Started collecting evidence. Recordings of conversations. Financial transactions. Names of everyone involved in the trafficking operations. Government officials taking bribes. Police officers providing protection. Intelligence agents looking the other way. He gestured weakly toward a tablet on the side table. It's all there. Backed up in encrypted servers. Multiple locations. I was going to testify. I was going to tear down the entire network from the inside. I was going to make sure that what happened to your sister, to Yuki, to 300 children every year, I was going to make sure it stopped. Adana's voice came out rougher than intended. The first word she'd spoken since entering the room. Why should I believe you? Because, Min-jae said simply, if I'm lying you can still kill me. You have the weapon. You have the training. You have every reason to want me dead. But if I'm telling the truth, if the people who hired you are the same people I'm trying to destroy, then killing me means they win. It means your sister's death meant nothing. It means you've spent 14 years being their tool instead of their enemy. The weight of those words settled over the room like physical pressure. They sent you specifically, Min-jae continued, because they knew you'd have every reason to pull that trigger. They knew that if you understood I'd been part of the system that took Amara, you'd kill me without hesitation. They knew they could use your grief as a weapon against the one person who might actually bring them down. Adana's mind was racing. 14 years of work. 17 completed assignments. Every job she'd taken thinking she was building power, building skills, building toward the day when she'd be strong enough to destroy the people responsible for Amara's death. And all of it, every single job had been serving them, protecting them, eliminating their enemies while she thought she was becoming powerful enough to fight them. They'd been using her grief, using Amara's memory, using the thing she cared about most as the mechanism to make her complicit in the very system she wanted to destroy. I have proof, Min-jae said. Not just recordings. I have the actual files. The trafficking records. Your sister's file is in there. Everything about how she was taken, where she was moved, what happened to her. I've been trying to trace every child, every victim, trying to understand the full scope of what I helped do. He paused. If you kill me now, you'll never see it. You'll never know what actually happened to Amara. You'll never know the truth about who's been employing you all these years. You'll just be another tool they used and discarded. His voice softened. But if you help me, if you choose to save me instead of kill me, we can destroy them together. We can burn down the entire system. We can make sure your sister's name means something. That her death led to something bigger than just another number in their ledgers. What would you do? If you were standing in that room, weapon raised, looking at the man who just confessed to being part of the system that destroyed your family, Would you pull the trigger? Or would you choose to hear the truth first? Let me know in the comments. Because Adana's about to make a choice that will change everything. She stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Every instinct she'd spent 14 years cultivating screamed at her to pull the trigger. To end him. To take the payment and walk away. But there was something else. Something quieter. Something that had been buried under all the professional coldness and practiced detachment. A question. What if he's telling the truth? What's your real name? Min-jae asked softly. The question cut through everything. Through the armor. Through the operational identity. Through 14 years of being nobody. Adana, she said. She said her birth name out loud for the first time in 14 years. Felt strange on her tongue. Foreign. Like a language she'd once spoken fluently but had forgotten how to use. Min-jae's expression shifted. Something that looked like relief and recognition, and the acknowledgement that she wasn't just a ghost. She was a person. My real name is Jin-ho, he said. Park Jin-ho. I was born in Busan. My father was killed when I was 8 years old by a rival organization. That's when I learned that the only way to survive in this world was to become untouchable. To stop caring about people. To become Min-jae, the man without weaknesses or attachments. He held her gaze. But when you walked into this room and hesitated, I felt something I haven't felt in years. The possibility of being saved. Not because you chose me over your mission, but because you chose yourself. You chose to believe there might be something more than just completing the job. Adana lowered her weapon completely. Slowly. Deliberately. Making a choice that went against every survival instinct she'd developed. She holstered the gun. Show me, she said. Show me the proof. Show me my sister's file. Show me who hired me. Show me everything. Relief washed across Jin-ho's face. But before either of them could say anything else, an alarm sounded. Red emergency lights. The casino security system detecting an anomaly. Someone knew she was here. Someone knew the job had gone wrong. The hunt was about to begin. If you're feeling what Adana's feeling right now, that impossible moment when everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down, when the person you came to kill becomes the person offering you the truth you've been searching for your whole life, then subscribe. Subscribe because this is where the story stops being about revenge and starts being about something bigger. Something more dangerous. Something that's about to burn down an entire criminal empire. Can someone who profited from evil truly be redeemed? Is Jin-ho a villain seeking redemption? Or a victim of the same system that destroyed Adana? Tell me in the comments what you think. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me. For every person who's ever had to choose between revenge and redemption. Between the mission and the truth. Between destroying your enemy and saving them. The alarm didn't stop. If anything, it got louder. More insistent. Jin-ho moved faster than someone recovering from a gunshot wound should be able to move. Disconnecting his foreline. Pulling on clothes that had been folded on a chair nearby. They know, he said, voice tight with urgency. They know you didn't complete the job. They're coming. Adana's training took over. She moved to the door, pressed her ear against it, listening. Footsteps. Multiple people. Coming from both directions. They were being boxed in. Is there another way out? She asked. Jin-ho nodded, moving to what looked like a blank wall panel. He pressed something, a hidden mechanism, and the panel slid open, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor. This building used to be a hotel, he explained, gesturing for her to go first. They converted it but kept the old service passages. Most people don't know they exist. They moved into the darkness, Jin-ho pulling the panel closed behind them. The passage was barely wide enough for one person, forcing them to move single file. Emergency lighting provided just enough illumination to see a few feet ahead. Where does this lead? Adana asked, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Underground parking. 3 levels down. I have a vehicle there. Always have an escape route. They moved quickly despite Jin-ho's injury. Adana could see him favoring his left side. Could hear the slight catch in his breathing that suggested pain. But he didn't slow down. Didn't complain. Just kept moving. Behind them, muffled voices. Someone had found the room. Found it empty. Found the hidden panel. They're following, Adana said. I know. We need to move faster. The passage opened into a stairwell, concrete and steel, utilitarian. They descended rapidly, their footsteps echoing off hard surfaces. Adana kept her weapon drawn, eyes scanning for threats, mind calculating distances and angles and escape routes. They reached the parking level. Jin-ho led her to a black Range Rover, unlocked it with a key fob, gestured for her to drive. "You know Seoul better than I do?" she asked. "No," he said, climbing into the passenger seat, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "But I need to access the files on my phone. Show you what I promised to show you. You drive. I'll navigate." She didn't argue. Started the engine. The vehicle roared to life. "Where are we going?" "Out of the city. I have a safe house in Incheon. We can." He stopped, looked at something on his phone. His face went pale. "What?" Adana demanded. "They just put out a notice. On the dark web networks. A bounty. $5 million. For both of us. Dead or alive. $5 million. That was serious money. That would bring every contract killer, every desperate criminal, every opportunist in Seoul out looking for them. How long do we have?" Adana asked. "Minutes. Maybe less." She put the vehicle in gear, drove toward the exit ramp. And that's when she saw them. 3 vehicles pulling into the parking garage from street level, blocking the exit. "Back exit?" she asked. "Blocked by construction. This is the only way out." She looked at the 3 vehicles. Looked at Jin-ho. Made a decision. "Hold on." She floored the accelerator. The Range Rover shot forward. The vehicles blocking the exit didn't move. They assumed she would stop, would surrender, would make the sensible choice. She didn't. The Range Rover was heavier, better armored. She aimed for the gap between 2 of the vehicles, hit them at speed, used mass and momentum to force them apart. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. The Range Rover's front end crumpled but pushed through. They burst onto the street, tires smoking, engine roaring. Behind them, chaos, vehicles trying to pursue, getting tangled with each other, losing precious seconds. Adana drove like someone who'd spent years studying urban escape routes. Turned down side streets. Cut through alleys. Used every trick she'd learned in 14 years of staying alive in hostile territory. Jin-ho was working on his phone, fingers moving rapidly across the screen. "I'm sending you the files," he said. "Everything. Encrypted. Multiple backups. If something happens to me, you'll still have access." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Adana said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "We don't know that. We don't know who's coming for us. We don't know how many people they've mobilized. $5 million is enough to turn half of Seoul against us." He looked up from his phone. "I need you to understand something, Adana. The file I'm sending you, your sister's file. It's going to be hard to read. It's going to show you things you don't want to know. But you deserve the truth." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Tell me now. Before I read it. Just tell me, did she suffer?" Jin-ho was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally, and there was genuine pain in his voice. "I'm sorry. But yes. The records show she was moved through 3 different locations over 6 months. They tried to break her, to make her compliant. But she fought. The whole time she fought." Adana's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, forcing the tears back, forcing herself to focus on driving. "How did she die?" "She didn't," Jin-ho said quietly. The vehicle swerved slightly as Adana's concentration broke. "What?" "She didn't die. At least, not according to the records. She escaped. During a transport between Seoul and Los Angeles. She fought the guards, created enough chaos that several of the other girls escaped too. The operation lost track of her after that." Adana's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "You're saying she might be alive?" "I'm saying the records don't show a death. I've been trying to trace what happened to her after the escape, where she might have gone, whether she survived. But the trail goes cold after Seoul." He paused. "I'm sorry. I know that's not the answer you wanted. I know uncertainty might be worse than knowing. But it's the truth. She escaped, and I've been looking for her ever since I found her file." Adana couldn't speak, couldn't process. For 14 years she'd assumed Amara was dead. Had built her entire identity around that assumption. had buried the grief so deep that it became the foundation of who she was. And now maybe Amara was alive. Why didn't you tell me this immediately? She asked, voice raw. Because I needed you to choose, Jinho said. I needed you to decide to help me, not because I was offering hope about your sister, but because you believed stopping the trafficking network was the right thing to do. If I'd led with this information, you would have spent the rest of your life wondering if I'd manipulated you. If I'd used your grief as a weapon just like they did. He was right. She hated that he was right. But he was. The safe house, she said. How far? 20 minutes. If we're not intercepted. They drove in silence. Adana's mind was racing. Amara might be alive. After 14 years of grief, of building her entire life around revenge for a death that might not have happened, there was a possibility. What happens when we get to the safe house? She asked. I show you everything. The full records. The trafficking network structure. The names. The operations. And then we decide, do we run? Or do we fight? Adana didn't need to think about her answer. We fight. Jinho smiled despite the pain, despite the danger, despite everything. Good. Because I've been waiting 6 months for someone to help me fight. I've been gathering evidence alone. Planning alone. And I knew that when the right person found me, someone who had skin in the game, someone who understood what was at stake, we could actually win. You're assuming a lot, Adana said. You're assuming I won't kill you the moment we're safe. You already made your choice, Jinho said. In that medical room, when you lowered your weapon, when you said your real name, you chose truth over revenge. You chose to be Adana instead of Omega. He was right again. She'd made her choice. And there was no going back. They reached the safe house, a nondescript apartment building in Incheon, the kind of place where residents minded their own business and didn't ask questions about neighbors who came and went at odd hours. Jinho led her to a third-floor apartment. Inside it was sparse but functional. Computer equipment. Servers. Enough weapons and supplies to suggest someone had been planning for a siege. How long have you been preparing this? Adana asked. 6 months. Since I decided to get out. Since I decided that redemption might actually be possible. He sat down at the computer, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. Adana could see blood seeping through his shirt. He needed medical attention. But first she needed to see the files. Jinho pulled up encrypted documents. Files upon files. Years of trafficking records. Children's names. Ages. Origins. Destinations. What happened to them? And there, in the midst of thousands of entries, Amara, age 16. Lagos, Nigeria. Taken for debt payment. Processed through Seoul. Designated for Los Angeles operation. And then escape. Multiple subjects lost during transport incident. Whereabouts unknown. Adana stared at the screen. At her sister's name. At the confirmation that everything Jinho had told her was true. I've been searching, Jinho said quietly. Using every contact I have. Every resource. Trying to find what happened to the girls who escaped that transport. I found 3 of them. They're alive. They're safe. They helped me understand how the network operates. How they move people. How they hide them. He pulled up more files. But Amara, I haven't found her yet. She disappeared after Seoul. No credit card usage. No border crossings. No hospital records. Either she's very good at staying hidden or she's dead. Adana finished. Or she's dead, Jinho confirmed. I'm sorry. I wish I had a better answer. Adana sat down. The weight of everything, the escape, the revelation, the possibility that her entire understanding of her life was wrong. It was too much. I need a minute, she said. Take your time, Jinho said. We're safe here. For now. She walked to the window. Looked out at Incheon at night. Lights stretching to the horizon. Millions of people. And somewhere out there maybe her sister. After 14 years of grief she had hope. And hope, she was discovering, was more painful than grief had ever been. Because grief meant it was over. Hope meant she had to keep fighting. Keep searching. Keep living with the uncertainty. Behind her, Jinho was pulling up more files. Planning their next move. preparing for the war they were about to wage against the same system that had destroyed both of their lives. And Adana realized something in that moment. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in 14 years she had a partner. Someone who understood. Someone who'd been broken by the same system. Someone who'd chosen redemption over destruction. She turned from the window. "Show me everything," she said. "Show me the whole network. Every name. Every operation. Every person who's ever profited from this." Jin-ho looked up at her. "It's going to take all night." "Good," Adana said. "We have all night. And tomorrow we start burning it all down." For the next 8 hours they worked. Jin-ho walked her through everything, the structure of the Lagos cartel's trafficking network, the Korean operations he'd been part of, the American connections, the European buyers. He showed her financial records, communications, evidence that would put hundreds of people in prison if it ever saw the light of day. He showed her the recording he'd made, years of conversations, admissions, confessions, and he showed her his plan, the way to make it all public. The way to make sure it couldn't be buried or suppressed or ignored. "We upload everything," he explained, simultaneously, to news organizations, to law enforcement agencies, to watchdog groups, to the internet. "We make it so widespread, so public that they can't contain it." "They'll kill us," Adana said. "Probably," Jin-ho agreed. "But they'll kill us anyway. The bounty on our heads isn't going away. The only question is, do we die for nothing? Or do we die making sure this system can't continue?" Adana thought about Amara. About 14 years of searching for purpose in revenge. About the possibility that her sister might be alive somewhere, still running, still hiding, still afraid. "We don't die," she said. "We fight. We win. And then we find my sister." Jin-ho smiled. "Ambitious. You said yourself, I already chose truth over revenge. I chose to be Adana instead of Omega. So let's finish what we started." She extended her hand. "Partners." Jin-ho took her hand. "Partners." And with that word everything changed. They weren't enemy and target anymore. They were two people who'd been broken by the same system, choosing to fight back together. The war was about to begin. Before we see how this ends, before you find out if Adana and Jin-ho survive, if the upload completes, if the system finally burns down, I need you to understand something. This is the moment. The moment when two broken people choose to fight instead of surrender. The moment when love born from shared trauma becomes stronger than hate. The moment when redemption stops being an idea and becomes action. If you've made it this far in the story, you're not just watching anymore. You're invested. You care about what happens to them. So subscribe. Subscribe because you need to see how this ends. Subscribe because stories like this, stories about choosing transformation over destruction, they need to reach people. Hit that button. Not for me. For every person who thinks it's too late to change. For every person who believes they're too broken to be saved. For every person who needs to know that redemption is possible. They came in waves. The first wave was opportunists. Street-level criminals who'd seen the bounty notice and thought $5 million was worth the risk. They came with handguns and desperation and very little tactical training. Captain Kwan's men, 12 of them, all former members of Jin-ho's organization who'd walked away for their own reasons, repelled them easily. Professional soldiers against amateurs. It was over in minutes. But the second wave was different. Professional contractors. Former military. People who understood urban combat and defensive positions, and how to coordinate attacks. They came with better weapons, better tactics, better organization. The battle that followed was nothing like what Adana had experienced in her 14 years as an assassin. Assassination was surgical. Precise. One target, one bullet, disappear. This was chaos. This was warfare. She moved through the warehouse with lethal efficiency, years of training taking over. Every shot counted. Every movement calculated. But there were so many of them. For every attacker they eliminated, two more appeared. Inside the data center, Jin-ho monitored the upload while simultaneously coordinating defense through communication equipment. His voice remained calm despite the chaos, calling out positions, directing fire, managing the impossible mathematics of holding against overwhelming odds. Progress bar. 23%. The third wave hit hard. These weren't criminals or contractors. These were cartel enforcers, the same organization that had taken Amara, that Jinho had once been part of. They knew how Jinho thought, knew how he'd set up defenses, knew every tactical decision he would make because he'd trained them. Kwon took a bullet to the leg, kept fighting. One of his men went down, then another. The defensive perimeter was collapsing. Progress bar. 41%. Adana found herself back-to-back with Jinho. His shoulder wound had reopened, blood soaking through his shirt, but his hands were steady on his weapon. "This is what you wanted?" he asked, voice tight with pain and something that might have been dark humor. "Partnership." "Shut up and shoot," Adana replied, dropping an attacker who'd breached the data center entrance. Progress bar. 58%. Time became elastic. Seconds stretched into hours. Hours compressed into moments. The world narrowed to muzzle flashes and tactical decisions, and the desperate mathematics of survival. They were losing. Even as the upload continued, even as the evidence spread across networks they couldn't stop, the warehouse was being overwhelmed. Too many attackers. Not enough defenders. The math didn't work. And then sirens. Federal vehicles. Police. Actual law enforcement converging on the warehouse with overwhelming force. Jinho had made one final gamble that he hadn't told Adana about. Before starting the upload, he'd sent a message to federal investigators who'd been trying to bring down the Lagos cartel for years. He'd told them where he was, what he was doing, and that if they wanted to catch every major player in Seoul's trafficking network in one place, they should come to this warehouse. Because everyone hunting Jinho and Adana, everyone drawn by the $5 million bounty, they were all part of the system. All complicit. All guilty. Progress bar. 79%. Federal forces swept in. The attackers who'd been trying to kill Jinho and Adana suddenly found themselves surrounded. Some tried to fight. Some tried to flee. Most surrendered. The battle ended not with a final confrontation but with handcuffs and arrests, and the mechanical efficiency of law enforcement doing what they'd been unable to do for years, catching everyone at once. Progress bar. 94%. Adana lowered her weapon. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't noticed until the fighting stopped. Jinho was sitting against a server rack, hand pressed against his reopened shoulder wound, face pale from blood loss. But he was smiling. "We did it," he said. Progress bar. 99%. 100%. Upload complete. The evidence was out. 73 different locations. Hundreds of files. Thousands of victims documented. Every transaction traced. Every name exposed. The system couldn't suppress this. Couldn't bury it. Couldn't make it disappear. Federal agents entered the data center. Weapons drawn. But not pointing at Jinho and Adana. Pointing at the arrested attackers being processed outside. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who'd spent decades fighting losing battles against organized crime, looked at Jinho with something that might have been respect. "Park Jinho," she said. "You have a lot to answer for." "I know," Jinho replied. "And I will. All of it. Every crime. Every person I hurt. I'll testify against everyone." The agent looked at Adana. "And you are?" "Adana," she said, using her real name. "Not Omega. Not anymore. I was sent to kill him. I chose differently." The agent nodded slowly. "Good choice." Epilogue. Transformation. 88:00-90:00. What followed was months of testimony, trials, arrests, the slow, methodical process of justice that never moves as fast as revenge but carries more weight when it finally arrives. Jinho testified for 87 hours across multiple proceedings. He didn't ask for leniency, didn't try to minimize what he'd done. He simply told the truth. All of it. Every operation. Every person. Every decision he'd made that had contributed to destroying lives. His testimony led to the conviction of 43 cartel operatives across 4 continents. It led to the shutdown of major trafficking routes through Lagos, Seoul, and Los Angeles. It led to the recovery of 116 children who were still trapped in the system. He was sentenced to 15 years. Given credit for cooperation, would likely serve 8 with good behavior. But he'd expected life. had been prepared for it. 8 years felt like mercy. Adana testified too. About being used by the cartel through her handler. About the 17 jobs she'd completed thinking she was building power when she was actually protecting the system that had taken Amara. She was offered immunity in exchange for her testimony. Offered a new identity. Offered the chance to disappear. She refused. "I want to work for your unit," she told the federal agent who'd arrested them. "I want to use everything I learned, all the skills they taught me, to bring down more networks like this." The agent looked at her for a long time. "That's not how this usually works." "Nothing about this is usual," Adana replied. 6 months later, Adana was working as a special consultant for the International Crimes Against Children unit. She used her knowledge of criminal networks, her understanding of how traffickers thought, her skills in tracking and infiltration, everything that had made her a successful assassin, to save people instead of destroying them. She and Jin Ho communicated through letters. He was in a federal facility, serving his sentence, spending his days working with investigators to identify more victims, to trace more networks, to ensure that the evidence he'd gathered continued to save lives. His letters were careful, restrained, but there was something in them that felt like hope. 1 year after the warehouse battle, Adana received a message from a federal investigator. They'd found a woman, mid-20s, living under an assumed name in Vancouver. She'd been trafficked 10 years ago, escaped during a transport, had been hiding ever since. Her real name was Amara. Adana's hand shook so badly she could barely hold the phone. "Are you sure?" she asked. "We need you to make positive identification," the investigator said. "But the details match. Age, origin, everything." The flight to Vancouver was the longest 8 hours of Adana's life. The meeting was arranged in a federal safe house. Neutral ground. Supervised. No pressure. When the door opened, Adana saw a woman, 26 years old. Beautiful despite the hardness in her eyes, despite the defensive way she held herself, despite the decade of trauma written in her posture. Amara looked at her. Didn't recognize her at first. Adana had been 7 years old when they'd last seen each other. Now she was 21. Different. Changed. "Amara," Adana said, her voice breaking. "It's me. Adana. Your sister." Amara's face transformed. Went from guarded to shocked to something that looked like breaking and healing happening simultaneously. "I told you not to talk," Amara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I told you to stay quiet. To stay safe." "I didn't talk," Adana replied, moving forward, pulling her sister into an embrace that felt like closing a wound that had been bleeding for 10 years. "I didn't talk until I was strong enough to destroy the people who took you." They held each other. Two sisters who'd been torn apart by a system designed to break people, finding each other again through the work of someone who'd once been part of that system, and chose to burn it down instead. Recovery wasn't simple. Amara had her own trauma, her own journey. She'd spent 10 years running, hiding, surviving in ways that had left their own scars. But she was alive. And she wasn't alone anymore. 2 years after the warehouse battle, Adana visited Jin Ho in federal custody. She was allowed regular visits now, approved because she was working with the same unit that was coordinating with his testimony. "I found her," Adana said. "Amara. She's alive." Jin Ho smiled, genuine joy breaking through the careful control he maintained. "I'm glad. I kept hoping. She's working with the same unit I am now," Adana continued, "helping other survivors, using what happened to her to prevent it from happening to others." "That's good," Jin Ho said. "That's really good." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "I've been thinking," Adana said, "about what you said. About redemption. About how it's not about erasing the past, but making sure the future is different. And I think you were right. I spent 14 years planning revenge. Convinced that destroying the people who took Amara would heal something in me. But it wouldn't have. Revenge just creates more emptiness." She leaned forward. "But this, working to save others, helping survivors rebuild, using pain to create protection instead of destruction, this actually means something." Jin Ho reached across the table, took her hand. The gesture was carefully monitored by the guards but allowed. "When I get out," he said quietly, I want to keep doing this work. I want to spend whatever time I have left making sure that what we started doesn't stop. We, Adana noted. You said we. Partners, Jinho said. You said it yourself. That's what we are. She squeezed his hand. Partners. 4 years after the warehouse battle, Jinho was released on parole. He'd served his time, cooperated fully, helped bring down networks across 3 more continents. Adana was waiting when he walked out of federal custody. They didn't embrace, didn't make grand declarations, just looked at each other with the understanding of 2 people who'd been broken by the same system and chose to heal together. Ready to get back to work? Adana asked. Been ready for 4 years, Jinho replied. They walked together into Seoul's morning light. 2 people who'd met as enemy and target, who'd chosen trust over revenge, who'd transformed their pain into purpose. Behind them a decade of trauma. Ahead of them years of work to dismantle the systems that created that trauma. And between them something that looked like love. Not the fairy tale kind. Not the kind that fixes everything. But the kind that acknowledges damage while choosing connection anyway. The kind that sits with pain while working to prevent others from feeling it. The kind that understands that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about transforming what hurt you into something that protects others. They had found each other in the darkest place. And they had chosen light. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. If this story affected you, if Amara's story, the real sisters who are still being taken, still being trafficked, still being treated as numbers instead of people, if that matters to you, then I need you to understand something. Stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors. They show us the systems we ignore. The injustices we accept, the people we forget. Adana's transformation from Omega to herself, from weapon to person, from nobody to somebody, from destroyer to protector, that's not just a character arc. That's a choice every one of us makes every single day. Do we use our pain to hurt others? Or do we transform it into something that protects them? Subscribe. Not because you want more content. Subscribe because you want to be part of a community that believes people can change. That believes redemption is possible. That believes broken systems can be challenged by broken people who choose to heal together. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who thinks they're too damaged, too far gone, too broken to become something more. Because Adana and Jinho's story proves something fundamental. We're never too broken to choose differently. Never too far gone to transform. Never too lost to find purpose in protecting others. 300 children a year. That's what the Lagos cartel was trafficking. And because of 2 people who chose partnership over violence, chose redemption over revenge, chose love over hate, that number is now 0. Systems fall when people refuse to be complicit. When they choose to burn down what breaks them instead of becoming another tool of oppression. You don't have to be an assassin or a mafia boss to make that choice. You just have to decide that the pain you carry will be transformed into protection instead of destruction. So subscribe. Be part of this. Carry this message forward. And remember, you're never just one person. Your choice. And that choice echoes into futures you'll never see. Thank you for witnessing Adana's story. I'll see you in the next one. Don't talk became speak. Nobody became Adana. Omega became love. And that transformation, that's the most revolutionary act of all.